आइए हम सुने विज्ञान की अनकही कहानियाँ। आइए हम सुने विज्ञान की अनसुनी कहानियाँ।
Hello listeners, you're listening to Vigyan Ki Awaaz podcast program on STEM popularization, catalyzed and supported by the Ministry of Science and Technology, Government of India through its National Council for Science and Technology Communication and Media for Community Foundation. Project devised and designed by Dr. R. Sridhar and assisted by Ashish Tiwari. Local coordination and production, Professor Subramanian. Content writing by Professor Mansa Gowda and post-production by Professor Kaushik P. Kanchan of Garden City University, Bengaluru.
Garden City University, conquer we shall all adversity. GCU, emphasis on life. GCU, emphasis on life.
Today on Vigyan Ki Awaaz, we have Professor Govindaraju T, a distinguished scientist at JNCASR, Bengaluru. His research spans chemistry, biology and biomaterials, contributing significantly to Alzheimer's research, molecular diagnostics and silk-based biometrics. Professor Govindaraju started off by explaining his research in layman terms for our listeners to understand better.
I'm Professor T. Govindaraju, specializing in chemical biology at JNCASR Bengaluru. My current research focuses on the chemical biology of functional and disease amyloids, encompassing elucidating novel disease mechanism, diagnostic, therapeutics, and diagnostics.
Professor Govindaraju started off by explaining his research in layman terms for our listeners to understand better.
Yes. In a layman terms, our research groups works on problems related to human health. For example, you all must have heard of dementia. Dementia is a common kind of a health condition in our society across the globe. So when I say dementia is not a specific disease, but an umbrella term used for several diseases which are related to the brain, particularly which affects conditions that affects our learning, memory, and overall cognitive functions. How we behave, how we do our work. And among, as I mentioned, several diseases, Alzheimer's disease, I'm sure now I think the society is well aware of this disease, is one of the disease responsible for dementia. In fact, a major disease. 80% of all dementia cases across the globe is caused by Alzheimer's disease. So our group, the complexity of this disease is such that still there are no fully approved or the diagnostic, detection methods as well as way to cure this particular disease. It is indeed becoming a major health problem in our society. So our group is trying to understand the complexity of this disease, understanding how this disease sets in, starts up, and then once we understand the disease itself, that will enable us to developing novel way to detect, that is what we call diagnostics, and also to treat this disease, that is therapeutics. Sometimes we can also develop the tools which can do both, detect as well as treat. That is called theranostics, diagnostics and therapeutics. Together we call it as theranostics. Yes, thank you very much for that. I was not expecting this question in this particular short. I thought it's a short interview. Nevertheless, see, when I started off my own research, that's almost 16 years ago, people used to, when people ask, what you are working on in our own community, I said, I'm going to work on Alzheimer's disease. Then suddenly our peers will say, Alzheimer's disease is a disease of Western countries. Why are you working on it? Well, that has changed. Now nobody asks me that question because if you are aware, every regional language has a movie based on Alzheimer's disease and dementia. That means the public is fully aware of the consequences of Alzheimer's disease. That is the first point. And in coming to the how the Alzheimer's disease sets in and the consequences. Well, although as of now we talk about Alzheimer's disease is kind of says usually people gets Alzheimer's disease after 60 years. That is partially true because it's also linked to age, linked to age, but it is not age related, completely age related disease. That is also another misnomer in our society. If somebody is has a problem with the behavioral changes or a mental illness, we tend to neglect them. It's like almost like it's if people say it's a paralabaya, in Hindi, something like that. People will say, and then nobody will bother about them. And luckily things are changing, and the society seems to be giving importance to mental health. So that is, things have changed, and that also brought awareness in the society about Alzheimer's, dementia, and mental health as a whole. But if you go by, that's what I was mentioning about understanding the disease. So the Alzheimer's disease is not the pathologically how, for example, one knows somebody has Alzheimer's disease. If you go by clinical evaluation, that is linked to some kind of proteins. So we have a proteins. I use the word disease amyloid. That means there are proteins in our in the brain, and some, not all of them. Some of those proteins undergo misfolding, and then aggregates, forms a clumps. We call them plaques. Amyloid plaques in the brain, and that subsequently leads to neurodegeneration, meaning the cells, neuronal cells. We have trillions of cells in our body. The cells in the brain, we call them neuronal cells, and these cells undergo neurodegeneration, meaning breaking down, or simplistically we can say cell death. So in the beginning, for example, this process may start happening in the brain, but at the early stage, as I mentioned, there are billions of neurons in our brain, and they are connected through trillion connections. If one or two cells or few of the cells die, then still there will be rewiring. For example, the network of the neurons, there are so many cells, they compensate when few neurons die. But as the disease progresses, and more neuronal cells die, that wiring get really disrupted. Meaning, in the layman terms, that wiring in the brain get affected, and that's where we start, visually see that patient and the person has some problem, problem related to learning, problem related to memory, and overall cognitive abilities, and the person start losing ability to do his day-to-day activities. For example, they forget something, it first affects the short-term memories, and then of course as the disease progresses, the long-term memory is also affected. For example, a patient, let us say somebody is developing Alzheimer's disease, he forgets something, for example, a keychain, and in no time he forgets, and you will never be able to remember. So forgetting is common, everybody need not worry. So we forget things, but after a while we remember. But in case of these patients, so the short-term memory is so severe that they cannot remember. And in terms of so why I said is the disease mechanism, the mechanism linked to the disease actually starts happening very early on, maybe at the age of 40. But its manifestation takes some time. In some case it takes 10 years. In some case it takes 15 years. In some case it can also take 20 years. But nevertheless, the disease, the fundamental changes linked to the disease start happening 10 to 20 years early. If at all, for example, it comes, my aim, our research aim is to develop tools, understand this whole mechanism and develop tools to see if we can detect very early on, so that we can cure the disease. So that is, so that is how the link. And in terms of also, there are two things: the genetic link, whether Alzheimer's disease is a genetic or non-genetic. I would say yes and no. So as of now, Alzheimer's disease is largely non-genetic, but there are clear genetic indications. In 80% of the cases, it is not, as of now, there are still lots of research coming out. I mean, as of now, considered is largely, not genetic. But when the disease sets in, several other genetic factors, the family, familial, links also start, contributing to the progressiveness of the disease. And you also talked about gender. So it is, that is a very, very good question because women seems to, suffer, for example, if you take the patients across the globe, I think women population suffering from Alzheimer's disease is marginally higher than the male population. And that is also, we know why, because the woman, goes through, lots of stress conditions, more than men. So that, actually that is essentially I'm coming to the fact that Alzheimer's, I remember I mentioned non-genetic aspects and things like that. So that is linked to the stress level. How much, for example, anybody who goes through, lots of stress or inflammation, kind of conditions, they tend to get the disease very early on. And another aspect is how a person is physically and mentally, active. See, that is also equally, very, very important. For instance, why we used to say that Alzheimer's disease is a disease of Western countries, because, India was a poor country, and we didn't have, everyone was to work. And then our food habits were very much, traditional, not processed food. All of them possibly affected, kind of contributing. And now India is moving towards developed country, and you know that, how much, physical and mental exercise that we are doing, in recent times, and then access to all kinds of things, and, also processed food, and the stress level. Now, for no reason, for example, this generation, I consider myself still young, but considering my next generation, I feel, pity that, we were actually, developed in spite of being, not having access to many modern facilities, still we were happy, we were physically active, mentally active. But now we have everything, but still we talk about, so much of mental, problem, mental health problem, depression, stress levels, so our younger generation, kids going through. It is something is very alarming.
Yeah. Professor Govindaraju then told us about his research and how it is going to help India in the short term and the long term.
It was actually a very eye-opening thing, sir. As you rightly told, today we speak only on a physical health, we are not taking care of mental health. And what was the most uniqueness, as you rightly told, women, we are been both in the working thing.
If you want, I can add another thing.
Yes, please.
See, for example, myself, I'm happy about my profession, what I'm doing, extremely happy. In addition to that, if I have to say, if you ask why, I can give several reasons.
Yes.
But one reason I can tell you is I continue to learn, every second, every minute.
Correct.
Okay?
Correct.
So we, being scientists, we continue to expose to new things, continue to, study new things, and our mentally we are so active.
Yes.
Yes. Because at least because of my profession, I'm very, very, active. Even if I'm, somebody, if somebody is active mentally, they can easily push this, the Alzheimer's disease for at least 10 or 20 years, even if they are going to get it.
Okay.
So that is also there.
All right.
Yeah.
He then shared his views about how India is making significant progress in science and technology.
People don't understand. When I say stress is good actually.
Mm-hmm.
But how much stress you take? See, you have a, there is a threshold. If you have a, stress below the threshold, that always push you to do more. And if you don't have a stress, you don't do it. And for example, you also must have heard of inflammation. For example, in Corona time, COVID-19, people died not because of the virus, because of inflammation. For example, that, meaning, so we have a immune system, meaning we have our body as a system which always takes care of us. See, we continue to expose to viruses, many diseases, many pathogens, many toxins, but we don't get sick all the time, meaning our body has a system to take care. But whenever this become, the load of, for example, viral load or this stress load become too much, and our body, the immune system, what we call, that also become, over active. Okay, then it start attacking not only the toxins or viruses, also start attacking our own system. See, that's how corona people died, and that is also a very, very important topic in Alzheimer's disease. We call it as neuroinflammation. Inflammation related to the brain. It's like a stress, like inflammation, like a double-edged sword. As long as they are under control, they are good, actually.
You were listening to Vigyan Ki Awaaz, a podcast on STEM popularization, catalyzed and supported by National Council for Science and Technology Communication, Government of India. Tune in for more such episodes to Vigyan Ki Awaaz on this platform and also through Spotify, YouTube and Apple Music platforms.
आइए हम सुने विज्ञान की अनकही